This is also our first event hosted by the ISPOC and the club, All Things Business Schools on ClubHouse. For those who just joined this club or who are excited about business school academia, this is exactly the right place. This is a space to connect with fellow scholars, researchers, faculty members, PhDs, MBAs, graduate and undergraduate students. We'll be talking about everything and anything for this club, from academia to industry. Tonight, the theme of this room is about how to find an academic job at business schools. As many of you may know, business school professors are a group of people that are well paid, conducting really cool, important, and sexy research. And our connection with the industry is so intense that it's very common and usual for us to think about the practical and business implications ideas in our research. That's business school's finest. Tonight, we have the honor to invite speakers Dave and Alex to talk about their experience on the academic job market last year. Our first speaker, Dr. Dave Holtz. He is an incoming professor of management of organizations and entrepreneurship and innovation at UC Berkeley. Previously, he graduated from MIT Sloan. Another speaker of tonight, Dr. Alex Miller. He is an incoming professor of marketing at USC Marshall School of Business. Trust me, these are the two amazing guys. If you click on their bios, all of a sudden, you will realize that Dave and Alex, they're really successful as a PhD graduate. I met with these two guys a couple of years back at conferences. At that time, I saw their spike, and I really look up to them. Oh, by the way, I'm Chenshuo. I'm from NYU. Another moderator of today on the panel, his name is Raveesh, and he is also with NYU Star. So for tonight's agenda, what we're going to talk about today is that we're going to talk about a set of interesting and useful topics that can help PhD students graduate find a good academic job. So the rule of this room tonight is that the moderators will be asking some questions, and our speakers will answer these questions first before we get into free chat. Okay. Our moderators have prepared 5 to 6 questions. After our speakers answered these questions, for the audiences who wanted to raise their hands, please do that. We will then invite you up to the speakers panel so that you can interact with our speakers. All right, now I'm exercising my moderator's privilege to ask the first question. Dave and Alex, could you just give us some high-level idea or your own experience on the virtual job market last year? We know that last year the job market was largely impacted by COVID-19. And what is your prediction for the COVID impact on this year's job market? Is that going to be a virtual, offline, or hybrid mode? Dave and Alex, please.
Go ahead, Dave.
Sure. Cool. Well, first, Chenshuo, thank you so much for the the very effusive introduction. I appreciate it, and I'm not sure that I can live up to the high bar that you have set, the high expectations that everyone will have. Yeah. So in terms of the virtual job market, I mean, I think for me, and I'm sure Alex would probably say the same. It's kind of hard to compare it to a normal job market because I don't really know what a normal job market would have been like. I do think that there were a few things that were unique and interesting about it. One thing that was tough is that I guess this was a pro and a con in some ways, is that in a normal job market, I think depending on the particular field that you're looking at, there are certain conferences that are sort of when all of the first round interviews might happen. So if you're in marketing, I guess that's the AMA conference. If you're in IS, that's maybe CIST or WISE or ICIS. And this year, because of uncertainty, I think, around schools' budgets for hiring and things like that, things were very spread out. So the new jobs were kind of trickling onto the market very slowly. And so one way in which that was hard is that I felt like I was simultaneously in all stages of the job market. Like I would have a first round interview and be sending out my packet and have an on-site, all on the same day or something. And that was kind of tough. But I think the benefit of it is that it did make it possible to sort of go on multiple markets. And I think in a normal year, that's a little bit more difficult because, marketing historically has been very early. And so if you went on marketing and got a marketing job that you were excited about, you wouldn't even see those other markets, whereas I could see, all the markets at the same time. I think other things that were salient about the experience is that, in some way it did make it easier to apply for jobs that were maybe very far away from home for me because I didn't have to worry about so much the logistics of flying and things like that. The flip side was that, I did have some flyouts that were happening at like 6 in the morning or at 10 at night. And so that was kind of exhausting for jobs that were not in the US. And then I think the other thing that was kind of unique about it is just doing it all over Zoom, right? And so I think by and large, you can still give the seminar talk, you can still have the one-on-ones, things like that. And that all worked pretty well. And I think everyone was pretty used to it by the end. But especially if you were thinking about, taking a job at a school you had never visited, maybe in a city that you've never been to, a city or a country that you've never visited. It was kind of hard to make that kind of decision having not been there. And I think one nice thing about the normal flyout is that, not only are they interviewing you, but it gives you a chance to kind of get a sense and a feel of the department and the school and the city. So that was one thing that was kind of unique and difficult. In terms of this upcoming year, I have no idea. I mean, if I had to guess, it seems like vaccination, at least in the US, is going quite well. And so you'd hope it will go back to normal. But I get the sense from speaking to some professors and things like that, there might be sort of budgetary ripple effects. And so maybe it could be the case that, everything is in person or hybrid, but maybe the timing is, again, a little bit mixed up in the way it was this year. But anyway, I'll stop there and let Alex weigh in.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me here, Chenshuo and Raveesh. I think this is a really cool initiative you guys are doing. So I hope you guys keep it up. And yeah, I too, I think I have to kind of denounce the rock star title. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'll just be able to speak to the experience that I had this year, which it admittedly is probably not super typical. And yeah, so I think I experienced the same thing that Dave was talking about, which is like this decentralization of the job market. And I think that is definitely unique to coronavirus and just like the uncertainty that everybody had institutionally about whether they could hire and whether they wanted to hire and all of that. So yeah, that definitely was like, I think, a unique opportunity that I don't necessarily expect to kind of continue moving forward. But another aspect of the virtual presentation that I found kind of nice on the positive side was that, I mean, I haven't been on the job market in the past either, but I know from my colleagues that the job market is like among the most exhausting things you can do, and like a flyout can be among the most exhausting things. And if you have many of them, it's just a really long slog, right? So like some flyouts, they fly you out and you have dinner the night before, you have breakfast the day of, you give a presentation, you meet with people all day, and it's like a 36-hour affair. Whereas for me, like one of my flyouts is like 6 hours or something, which is still long, but like it just is not as exhausting, and I felt like I could handle that without having to, sell my body to the job market. And yeah, so I think overall, like I can see some aspects of the virtual job market moving forward. Like perhaps the bar for a first round interview might be lowered. Though it's hard to say exactly. Like I think, job markets have historically been centralized for a reason. It's like very convenient for everybody to do first round interviews all at the same place. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly moving forward. Like I think yeah, there's pros and cons. And personally, like I think a lot of things are going to go back to normal without, at least in academia, I don't expect like there to be super long-term effects on the job market. Because I think, yeah, there's a reason that they meet you in person. It is really nice to like visit and kind of explore not just the campus but get a feel for the town as well. Like it's, as Dave was saying, it's super hard to like commit to some place for a potentially like very long-term basis that you've literally never been to. So like that was not an enjoyable aspect of the job market this year. So yeah, I think things will go back to normal, more or less, but perhaps there will be some. It won't be as weird to do maybe some of the earlier round interviews virtually, but it's hard to say.
So I'm going to ask the next set of questions. This is Raveesh here. Thank you, Chenshuo, for setting this up. It actually is a lot of effort to get this going, so really great job. Now, Dave and Alex, your words actually made me relive this job market experience that I had last year. Wow, what a memory, right? Now, I'm going to ask you a question that everyone else in the panel has in mind. Why are you two leaving information systems? Or to put differently, how was it navigating multiple different job markets, marketing and entrepreneurship?
Alex, I'll let you take the first crack at this.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I would say for one, I would say maybe my situation shouldn't be considered typical for IS people. Like when I was just getting in and applying to PhD programs, I had very seriously considered going into quant marketing, and one of the reasons that I stayed at my joined the IS program at Wharton is because it has previously happened, I think once, that an IS person has gone to the marketing market from our department. So I knew it was something that had happened. And so for that reason, I kind of considered myself having some optionality, like way back when I was first starting my degree. This was an option that I had considered and kind of considered an asset of being able to maybe try both IS and marketing markets. Now, I mean, as my degree went on, like I became perfectly happy with the IS market, and I think what happened this year is that, you know, normally the marketing market would have been done or like really in full swing by summer, and because of coronavirus, like lots of jobs were delayed, and really were posted at the same time, more or less, that a lot of IS jobs were coming up. So for me, like I ended up applying to you know, jobs of both varieties. And I think personally my research fits, kind of naturally fits in either camp, and again, that's kind of due to my background and some of the interests I've had that kind of led me to consider both of these fields. So yeah, I say that just because, you know, I think for most IS students, not everyone in the audience is necessarily an IS student, but I think in general, like it's not super common to go from one department to another, and if you do have any intentions of that, like I think an important thing would be to just look for evidence of that happening in the past at that department, or you know, knowing maybe your advisor has a good relationship with some people in other fields is kind of a key important component of that. So I'll say that I'm not necessarily leaving IS. Like I hope to have some ties. But yeah, I've kind of always had this interest in quant marketing in the back of my mind, and it's kind of always been something that I've considered. So I guess, you know, that might be my only piece of advice is if it's something you're considering, especially with IS and marketing, like that's something you can, if you're planning for in advance, I think you can kind of make yourself attractive to both audiences. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Alex said. I mean, I think, you know, I guess I didn't go into my PhD program in what is essentially an IS department, you know, also considering quant marketing, but I guess it turns out that the research that I do, which is a lot of, you know, online marketplaces and digitization and things like that, does tend to kind of fit in both in IS and quant marketing. And so, I was well positioned to do either if I wanted to. And so one nice thing about this year and the way it shook out is that it did make it easier to do that. I think for people in the audience that are in IS, I mean, I think one thing that other students in the past in my department I know have thought about is that, relative to maybe some other types of business school departments, if you look at IS, what am I trying to say? Like, every business school, it seems, has a marketing department or a finance department, but there are a lot of really great schools that don't really have an IS department, right? So I'm trying to think, like, I don't know that Chicago, for instance, has like an IS department, or even, Berkeley doesn't really have an IS department. And so, if you sort of allow yourself to have another option as sort of, the second market that you're going on, you do open up a lot of you give yourself more shots at more jobs, I guess. I think in terms of setting yourself up to do that, I mean, being a part of the community that you're interested in joining and not just sort of sending in your job packet, out of the blue probably helps. So I think if you have a sense that you might want to go on a job market that is not your sort of home department, it probably behooves you to start going to some of those conferences, maybe submitting to some of those journals and getting to know, the people. But yeah, I mean, I think similarly to Alex, I don't really think of it as leaving IS. I hope to continue going to some of the conferences that I have attended in the past and really like, and just like continuing the co-author with people. And so, yeah, I mean, I will say one thing that I discovered, and this is maybe not exactly an answer to Raveesh's question per se, but I would encourage people to maybe cast like a broader net than you might think to at first. And that, I applied to some jobs that I thought these people will never invite me for a first round interview or for a flyout even, because I'm not a good fit. And then there were other departments where I thought like, oh, I'm like such a perfect fit for this department. The people in this research do stuff that's so similar to what I do. And some of the places where my prior was pretty good ended up not being interested. And some of the places where I thought I'd never fit were in fact, like quite interested in interviewing me. And so you never know what a given department is looking for and whether or not it's going to be, you're going to be resonant with their hiring needs in a particular year. So I think it helps to have an open mind about these things.
Yeah, I'll just echo two things Dave said to emphasize. So one is that, I mean, really the IS market is relatively small compared to things like marketing or management, which, every business school has those departments. And so, yeah, like there's really no harm in casting a wide net and keeping yourself open to these other markets, like especially if you have, geographic preferences. Like not every school has an IS department that you can apply to. I think I forgot the second thing, so I'll stop there.
I mean, that's great answers, right? I've noted these 3 points: conferences that other departments and other programs offer, the research fit that you may have, and the advisors' ties. I think these are some things that the audience here can take a look at. Over to you, Chenshuo.
Sure. Thank you, Alex and Dave, for the brilliant answers. I will be asking the third question. Before that, fortunately, the IS community still have your guys. The third question here is that there are a couple of things that you need to get them done before you're on the job market. One of them is your job market paper and your job market paper presentation, or the job talk. So the question here is, how much time did you spend on practicing your job market talk, and how did you prepare them? Like, you guys can give us a number, like how many hours, 50 hours, and who are those audiences you're practicing this job market talks to?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of job market practice, I will say that I guess the first time I was prepping my talk, I probably gave I want to say 5 or 6 practice talks. And, obviously before giving those practice talks, I spent a lot of time by myself, kind of putting together the slides, thinking about how the talk should go. It's hard for me to, estimate how many hours went into that initial preparation stage, maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 or something like that. But then, I will say as I gave those talks, I got a lot of really great feedback from other PhD students in my department, faculty, PhD students in other departments, and spent a lot of time really refining and changing the talk. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to estimate a number, but maybe 50 or 60 hours is right. I mean, I think a few things that I would give as like general advice, of course, having not been someone who's on the other side of a job talk, so this is just my sense. The first thing is that I do think that my early slides were really busy and at times really technical. And, at least in IS and in marketing and some fields like this, there's a lot of different sort of camps in those job talks that you're presenting to. So, in an IS department, you have the quant IS people, but you also have the behavioral people. In a marketing department, you have the quant marketing folks, but you also have the CD folks. And so it does help to be a little more high level in the job talk because it's often a pretty diverse audience. And, you might worry, someone who is technical is going to want more details on X or Y thing. And the way that I would try to handle that is to just modularize the talk so that I always had little links that I could pop out to and, talk about the details of a model or my estimation technique or whatever if someone was interested. But if no one was interested, I could just keep on going and not get bogged down in those details. The second thing I would say is that there is such a thing as, sort of over rehearsing the job talk. I think especially if you're someone who doesn't have necessarily a background in like theater or performing or something, if you've given the talk, dozens or hundreds of times, at a certain point, you might start to just sound bored when you're giving it, which is not the effect that you want to have. You want to sound excited when you're giving the talk. So be careful not to practice so much that you're just kind of like a robot who's reciting the talk. And then I think the last thing is if you are going to go on multiple markets, it's really worthwhile to have practice talks with audiences from those different fields. So I, realized or learned over the course of giving the job talk in IS departments and marketing departments and operations departments and whatever, that there were certain questions that tended to get asked a lot, but those questions differed a lot from field to field. And so it's really, beneficial to you to have a sense of when I'm presenting to a marketing department, these are the questions that will come up. When I'm presenting to an IS department, these are the questions that will come up. And those sets of questions are different. And then you have answers in the back of your pocket that you can sort of pull out and not be caught, just unprepared to answer what is a very, reasonable question, given that people in a given department approach the world with a particular lens. So I think those are most of my main points. I'll hand it over to Alex.
Yeah, those are all really excellent points. I think, yeah. So I mean, in terms of practicing, I think for me, like it must have been maybe back in May, like a very early version of my job market talk in this IS presentations over the cloud format, and so it's been something that I had presented many times over the course of probably the 6 months leading up to my the actual first job talk. So for me, that process was a little bit slow. As the job market got closer, I started to, deliberately time myself and give more presentations to live people. I mean, it was a little more difficult because, we were all remote. Like I couldn't just grab a fellow student in the hallway and ask him to present. But it was still, to me, the things that I found most useful for my practicing were really just like the week of and even the day before your talk, just doing a full run through in as realistic a scenario as possible and making sure that you are comfortable enough to get through the talk in a way that you're not rehearsing, but you know the slide that's going to come up next, and you might know how to lead into it, and you kind of know your pacing. Because I think it's just, yeah. So for me, it's you want to spend enough time up front to get the kind of the level of the talk right, but a lot of the practice is just you have to say out loud. You can't just like mumble under your breath as you're scrolling through PowerPoint. Like a real practice, and this was hard over Zoom, but like a real practice is something where you you stand up, you look into your camera, you're like actually saying the words out loud, and you're saying your job market. So I found that a very useful exercise to go through. I remember one of my first virtual conferences, like my presentation was absolutely terrible because the virtual thing kind of threw me off. You're staring at your computer and nobody can see you, and you're talking about really boring stuff. But yeah, I think it helps to practice yourself sounding confident and sounding like you know where your talk is going. The other point I just want to address or kind of add on to what David said was about really the level of your talk. Like it's 100% true that almost nobody reads your job market paper. I also think that there's a lot of people, most people are kind of coming into your job talk without having read the paper, without knowing exactly what your dissertation is. Like they know less about the topic than you do. So like for most reasonable questions, you should expect to be able to answer them better than most people in the audience. Now, obviously, there's if you're doing related work to some people, you're going to have some people in the audience who know some things, and you should be aware of like the level of technical detail that you should be expected to go into. But by and large, I think the job talk was like less taxing on like trying to impress people with how smart you are or like how fancy your methods are, and it's more a matter of demonstrating to people that you are a good communicator. This is kind of the only evaluation they're using to decide if you can stand in front of a room of MBAs and give a good lecture. Like, so that's really a big component for a lot of people, even if just subconsciously making sure that your job talk comes across as something that you are the genuine expert on. But yeah, so I will say it just helps like to really take your time in the first few slides and ask really big picture questions, slow down. You don't have to get right to the complicated stuff. And as Dave said, really for me, what I ended up doing is cutting out almost all of the most complex explanations on my methodology. And if somebody had a question, I could dive into that, but rather I typically just said, you know what, I don't have time to address that right now. I'll follow up with you afterwards. And that is usually sufficient to kind of address a technical question. So I think I'll stop there.
Great tips on job market talk, Alex and Dave. Thank you so much. I actually want to highlight that both Dave and Alex, they presented their job market papers on ISPOC series, that is the IS student presentations over the cloud. And these talks were fantastic and the questions were even amazing. So those who haven't attended these talks, which are actually only open for students, you should actually connect with Chenshuo to get an invite for the next one.
One thing I'll say is I think it's very interesting. Like that's probably among the first times I had presented it at that presentation, and to compare that version to like my final job market version was extremely different. So you should really expect lots of evolution, and to spend a lot of time on your PowerPoint and practicing that.
Yeah, it is also likely that you would change your presentation even the last day of the presentation, right? Like just before the job talk as well.
Exactly.
Actually, now I'm going to make you both uncomfortable again with my questions. This is a two-part question. Now, the first part is basically what are the various things that you can do on your leading up to this job market to make yourself a strong candidate? And the second part, see, both of your CVs are fantastic, and you build you build your CVs in your early days of PhD. But what does your last 1 year or the last 6 months running to this job market talk, your first job market talk, look like? The questions maybe to have a very focused question. what were the things that you were focusing on, and what sort of external help did you take in the last 6 months or the last 1 year?
It's a big question, Ravi. Big questions. Um, let me just say yeah. So I'll just briefly address kind of that first question. Just like what do you do? How do you prepare yourself? Realistically, like I think most people in the audience know if you're going for the academic job market, you know what most people want. Like it's a fairly standard a process. Expectations are fairly standard, right? So everybody knows that you want to try and present in the conferences for your field, try and get R&Rs or publications in the journals in your field, get to know people in your field, try to win awards, all that. I mean, one thing I think before I go any further that I want to say is though, like, all the things that we can say right now in terms of the advice we can give you, in terms of the things you can change between now and when you go on the market, like that stuff is the market is a very noisy process, and there's almost there's no magic bullet I can give you to say probably something that you don't already know in terms of do the best research you can, and try and get connected as well as you can to the places that you think you might end up. And yeah, so I just say that because it can be it's frustrating to realize how little control of the job market you have. Like at the end of the day, right? Like so, if I had if somebody were giving me job market advice a year ago or like 2 years ago, like it would almost not have applied because there was a coronavirus pandemic and everything got completely changed, right? So that was a very large exogenous shock that I couldn't have foreseen. But I mean, the reality is even on a regular job market, like lots of random things are going on. So one of my biggest pieces of advice is just to focus on the things that you can control, and like don't stress too much about doing something particularly for the job market. Like the life of a PhD student is not that different from the life of a professor, and so you should try and do what you need to do and do it to the best of your ability. But don't. It's not like there's some set of boxes you can tick to end up at the school that you want to end up at. So I just throw that out there, just because I think this type of advice, it can sound. I think there's a lot of stochasticity in where things end up in the end, and I don't want anybody to stress out too much about trying to control the uncontrollable. So that's I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think Alex's advice is great. I mean, I think, yeah, it's an incredibly noisy process, and ultimately, there's so much that is out of your hands. And, also in many cases, there can be a department that is really interested in you and really high on your profile and loved your talk, but, many times there's only one slot. And so there are 2 or 3 people that they feel that way about. I get the sense that these decisions can be made on things that are pretty random and really really out of your control. I do think there are a couple of things that worked out well for me that I would maybe recommend if these had not occurred to people. Although, as Alex said, I wouldn't totally like rejigger your life based on these pieces of advice. The first is that I do think it's worthwhile to send your papers out and to not just sit on your papers. So I had a lot of working papers that, I think especially as a PhD student, I was really concerned about sending papers to journals. I didn't want to get rejected. I was very insecure about the quality of work that I was producing. And, finally, I guess last spring and the fall before, I started sending out some of my papers, and I got lucky and I got a few R&Rs. And I do think that sort of creates a step function discontinuity in how interested departments can be in your application. It's unfortunate that it's the case because, the underlying quality of those papers did not change. All that changed is that they got this stamp of approval from a random selection of reviewers. But it did, I think it probably did make a difference. And so, don't sit on your work. Like, it's worthwhile to send them out and see what happens. And, maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't, but you may as well take that shot. And then one trend I kind of noticed in the job market this year, and if I had to guess, these trends will continue, is that there seemed to be a lot of hiring that was focused on, sort of social issues and diversity and research that addressed those things. So, research that was diversity, equity, and inclusion related. And then also people whose research and also potentially their teaching could plug into like business analytics and sort of masters of business analytics programs and things like that. It seems like a lot of schools are spinning up these types of masters of business analytics programs. And so, again, I wouldn't go out and like change your entire research agenda to be more DEI focused or to be about business analytics if that's not what you're interested in or not what you're already doing. But if you're kind of on the margin and you can think about how to, maybe frame your teaching statement or frame your research statement in such a way that it accentuates those things, like on the margin, I do think that departments will maybe be more likely to hire people who fit those sorts of hiring needs that they have for teaching purposes. So I guess those are the only things. But again, yeah, I mean, it is a really noisy process. For the second part of your question, Raveesh, I mean, the one thing I'll say, and this is something that was said to me, and I didn't quite believe it, but then it ends up being true, is that even in this year when, as Alex said, I was not flying around and not staying in hotels and not putting myself through this really physically exhausting process, the job market was a full-time job, basically. So for the 6 months that I was applying to jobs, I was constantly, sending in packets, getting ready for job talks, doing first round interviews, doing follow-up emails, chatting with professors to learn about departments, et cetera. And so you kind of don't, you really should just block out that 6 months of time and say, I'm going to get very little research done during this time period. And so that's just a good thing to kind of know and to build into your, your schedule for your PhD, I guess. And I really relied a lot on, people on my committee and also students who had graduated from my program in the past couple of years. And so I would really recommend, looking a cohort or two above you, and especially people that you're maybe close with, asking them for tips or advice or asking them how things went. Because there were so many instances where I was like, I want to send an email to check in with something, or, hey, I got this offer, but this other offer is going to explode. Is it weird to send an email or something like that? And, you just don't know the answers to these things. And so in some cases, you should absolutely feel comfortable talking to your advisor or your other mentors about that stuff. But even in cases where you feel like maybe this is such a small question, I don't want to pester my busy professor mentors, you should really rely on your your peers who have recently gone through this process and ask them for their advice and feedback, because they went through it recently and they're also now on the other side and maybe have seen what the other side of the process looks like.
These are great points.
Can I just add something on to Dave's points real quick? I 100% echo this sentiment of like getting your work out there. So like one thing that I think you shouldn't emulate, what I did this year was I was insecure about like the status of my job market paper, and so for up until very late in the process, I was trying to like write this expanded section and maybe change the direction a little bit. And I spent a ton of time on this extension, and ultimately, like, I went down this path and realized there's kind of a fundamental theoretical flaw underpinning it. Now, it took me all that time to figure that out. But what that did was, like, once I found this, fortunately, it was like a mathematical flaw that was clearly insurmountable. Like, if I hadn't have gotten to that point, who knows how long I would have tried to go on this path. But what that forced me to do is to say, okay, you know what, like my paper is the stage that it's in, like this is what I'm going to send people. And I honestly, like I should have just done that much earlier than I had allowed myself to do. I should have just been content with it and focused much more on the presentation, kind of the motivation, the literature review, um, uh, which ultimately I ended up doing, having to do all that anyway. But I think it is super important to kind of really just get your work out there and like don't try and over strategize or like over engineer your own papers thinking that last twist is going to really make the difference, because for me, like that was not time well spent. Yeah, and in terms of the time leading immediately up to the job market, like wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have gotten this job without the friends and colleagues that I had called up many times to practice my job talk with. So, I mean, I've practiced with my advisor, sure, but like there were times where I made a change and I didn't want to call my advisor at like 7 p.m. at night. And so I called up a friend and I would practice with this friend and they were very nice to sit there and give me feedback. And yeah, I would say however much I leaned on other people, like I probably didn't do it enough. It's a really valuable thing to do, to reach out to your friends, ask them to help, like especially as Dave said, like people just on the other side of the job market. When I would give my presentation to those friends, they would get back to me with feedback, which is like, wow, your talk is amazing. Like I didn't believe them, but like it still felt good to just have somebody tell you that your talk is good and put you in the right mindset in terms of getting that external feedback, external perspective. Yeah, I'd say the time leading up to the job market and the time including the job market is super stressful, right? Like the uncertainty around what your next 6 months is going to look like is extremely large. And so it can be exhausting and it's easy to get in your head. It's easy to get kind of caught up in all the what if scenarios and reaching out to people, venting to them, like having friends that you can just kind of blow off some steam is important too. Like having colleagues in your cohort or friends in other departments. I found that super useful resource for me throughout the job market process.
The highlight of your answer, Alex, was that your advisor was not available after 7 p.m.
He's got kids. There's only so much you can do.
I was kidding, of course. But the points that I noted were, tap onto the help that friends and colleagues can give. Also try things like conferences, awards, R&R, working paper. Try to have a teaching statement which is like very trendy. A bunch of such things, right? Even the physical and mental stamina, if you can. Like I do agree with you that some of these are just check marks, but I think because the process is very noisy, it's sometimes useful to have these checks. Over to you, Chenshuo.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you, Alex, Raveesh. Your answer is amazing. This is not flattery. This is a real feedback. So I wanted to ask the last question, but it turned out that part of this question has been already answered by Dave. Here's the question. Could you give us some tips for navigating the flyouts and the offers? Sometimes you will be receiving so many offers, and some of them are with the deadlines. It's like a dynamic game. Alex and Dave, could you give us some thoughts, please? Thank you.
I'll just speak to my perspective, which is not necessarily meant to be representative, but I'll say a couple things on this. So one is that, especially as an IS student, we're in a pretty technical field, and you have likely developed some pretty valuable skills as a PhD student in this field. Is to not underestimate your value on like the open marketplace outside of academia. Now, obviously, probably everybody wants to be a professor. That's why you got your PhD degree. But for me, just something that was really valuable, just to like psychologically, is just to know that like I had outside options. I didn't have anything lined up, but I was confident that like if I didn't get an academic job, there were other options which my life would have been fine. And what that does is it gives you the freedom to really get the offer that you want to get, and not settle for things which you are, which are not optimal for you personally. I'm not even going to say it's not a matter of being overqualified. It's a matter of like finding the job which genuinely you're going to be happy with. So I just say that because it's a useful thing to know, that your life does not revolve around the department that you end up as at the end of the academic job market. And it's psychologically taxing if you just expect that as the only possible outcome. So it's useful to have that in the back of your mind, so that allows you to, when an offer comes in, you can evaluate it and you can say, is this is this really where I want to be? Is this what I want to do? I'll stop there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Alex just said. I think, yeah, I mean, I think in almost all, business school fields, I think people can kind of undervalue themselves, and sort of lose sight of what they could make on the outside market. And to Alex's point, obviously there are reasons why we've all chosen this path and are going on the academic market and want that job. But, it's worth having the conversation with yourself and saying, do I want an academic job so badly that I would, take this academic job that maybe for various reasons, like where it's located or X or Y or Z might not be the perfect fit. Is that still better than these other outside options that I have? And if you realize that you have outside options that you're also excited about, it reduces the stress of the process by quite a bit. I think in general, in terms of just sort of navigating the game of the market, I think, when you do have updates, it can be useful to tell other schools. So, if you have an offer and you're still waiting to hear back from another place that you're interested in, it doesn't hurt to tell them, hey, I have an offer, but I'm still really interested in your school. Both because I think it can, sort of induce them to move quickly if they are also interested in you. And at the very least, they probably appreciate, getting that information. Yeah, I mean, I think, I just tried to put myself in the position of the schools on the other side of the market. And I think they get it. Hopefully people, don't take things personally if you turn down a job, since everyone can only accept one job. That's kind of just the way it goes. But, like as long as I thought that I might still be considering a job and I could imagine a world in which I would take it, I'd, hang on to the offer and be thinking about it. And I tried once I knew that I, was not going to take another job because I had decided that, or once I had decided that I was not going to take a given job because it wasn't the right fit, I tried to, let the school know and kind of free up the slot so that someone else on the market could have a shot at the job, So I just tried to be like a good actor in that sense. I guess one last thing I'll say that I think maybe doesn't exactly answer the question per se, but I do think one cool aspect of the job market is that, even though you're only going to take one job, I got to meet so many really interesting, really smart people just going to, or, virtually going to all of these departments and meeting with all these professors and all these PhD students and presenting my work and hearing about their work. And so I really do think it like benefits you to go through this whole process, even, even if you are really focused on like a certain subset of schools or something, like just meeting all the people and going through the process, like it's really exhausting, but you actually do benefit a lot from the network building and the, getting people familiar with your work and your personality, and just, it's kind of a cool opportunity to kind of take yourself out on the road and get to know a lot of new people. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Alex and Dave. I remember Ravish said one sentence for the job market last year that finding a job is exactly a story of who fits where. So don't feel upset whenever. And if you get the offer from your dream school, that is a cherry on the cake. So I think Ravish and I have been asking a couple of questions. That's quite enough for the moderator. So now we're inviting the audiences who wanted to interact with our speakers. Please raise your hand if you want to uh, ask any question. I'm sure that in the audiences, there are so many people who wants to know how to deal with this noisy process. So uh, please do raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or um, I will be asking another question though. So um, Alex and Dave, oh yeah, oh, okay. We have three people raising their hands. Ravish, could you help me inviting them to the speakers panel? Yeah. So I will be asking the last question before that. Um, Dave, I know that you were on the market for the last year and the year before last year. So how did you feel, getting on the job market for the 2 consecutive years?
Yeah, so I guess like the previous year I wasn't like officially on the market. I guess I was kind of interested in one job. I knew that this school was hiring, and I knew they were not likely to be hiring in the subsequent year, which was kind of my expected year of going on the job market. And so I kind of preemptively, or not preemptively, but I sort of, I guess, did what some people might call a soft market. So, I ended up applying to one job, but did not go on the market in full. I think there's kind of conflicted. I've heard different advice on whether or not it is good or bad to kind of go on the soft market like that. I've heard from people that if you go on the market once in some form and then you're on the market a second time, maybe schools wonder why didn't this person get a job the first time. On the other hand, I think that first run was really good practice, and it was a job that I was really interested in, and so I'm glad that I kind of took a shot at getting that job and applied for it and went through the process. So I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it ended up essentially being like basically a practice flyout, and I think that was a good experience to have. And I think I don't know what the advice is here, but I think similarly, just even going through the market this year, I feel like as I was doing more and more of these flyouts, I definitely kind of got better at them in some way, because you understand what it's like and the whole process is not super foreign. And so it is definitely a learned skill of like going through this process.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. So now we have four audiences on the panel. Let us follow the sequence. Hongyi, it's your turn.
Thanks, Chenshuo, and thanks, Alex and Dave, for the excellent talk. So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about like the role that the non-advisor committee members played in your job market process. So like, is everything like people talk about advisor effects quite a bit, but what are the roles of the other committee members, especially people are considering like secondary or tertiary markets, and what roles do they play?
I can say for me, I know for a fact that, I mean, so my advisor, he has a joint appointment in the marketing department, but he's, definitely very much squarely in the IS field. And so it was very important for me to have a letter from somebody directly from the marketing department at the Wharton School. So I think that's super important when you're trying to signal your genuine interest in another field. Like they definitely comes into play, I think, larger for that particular aspect. And I know for a fact that my letter writer from the marketing department knows people very well at the place that I ended up, and so I think it's important just to have a strong signal if that's your ambition to go on a secondary market.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm in a similar situation where my advisor is joint appointed in IS and marketing, and then one of my other committee members is Dean Eccles is also in a marketing department. So having that as sort of a signal, I'm sure made applying to marketing jobs easier. I do think for me, and I can't speak to everyone's experience, but I think both for the job market and in general for advising, I think it's really difficult to get all of your advising needs from one person. Different people on your committee will have different strengths. Maybe you have one senior professor on your committee who's really good at big picture vision and knows how to navigate the revision process really well, but is not as available on a daily basis or is not as good at handling data. Maybe you have someone who's like really good at statistical analysis but is not as senior, and so on and so forth. And so I found that sort of using the full committee to kind of ask for different types of advice at different moments has worked out pretty well. And I feel like similarly, with the job market, like I have one person on my committee who's gone on the marketing market, one person who has gone on a different market, one person who's really senior and knows more about the process, one person who thought really hard about industry versus academia. And so you can kind of just, all these people are there to support you and mentor you. And so you can ask different people for different pieces of advice depending on who you think is sort of best suited to provide it,
One tip for Hongi, to actually know how helpful committee members were for Dave, you should visit his Twitter page. He has actually made a video with the help of a celebrity to thank them. Is it right, Dave?
Yes, that is correct. I did do that.
Yeah.
I figured you only get to announce your first job once, so might as well do it with a splash,
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely hilarious and fun. Yes, I would now invite Jisoo to ask question.
Thanks. Thanks, Chenshuo and Raveesh for hosting this event. I think it's amazing. And let me introduce myself. My name is Jisoo, and I graduated in the econ program from USC. So Alex, welcome to USC.
Excellent.
And so I actually do research in the overlapping field of quantitative marketing and IS. So my advisor, I'm sure all of you have met her in your interview. Her name is Xia Yang, and I work with her on like different research topics. So given that I have like this interdisciplinary background, and I'm like introducing myself to the IS community, and I wonder what do you think is important to communicating with like a different target audience, and what's the one thing that you think that communicating with like the IS community is different from communicating with like the quantitative marketing audience?
I'll take a stab at this, but I'd also be curious what Alex thinks for sure. I think in particular with sort of quant marketing versus IS, I think my experience was I do think that marketing departments have more people who maybe work really, really firmly in the tradition of economics and are doing a lot of like structural modeling and demand estimation. And then there are certain like just the way that people talk about things can maybe be different, right? So for my job market paper, I was talking about the diversity of consumption when people are exposed to algorithms. And people in marketing would say, well, is this around like variety, like preferences for variety and variety seeking behavior and things like this that I think people think about a lot in marketing. And that's maybe just not necessarily the language you would use to describe that in an IS talk. And so kind of like just knowing how to translate, the way that I talk about the same thing with just slightly different language that is more familiar to that audience. And I think similarly, in an IS talk, I think just given the way that the field of IS works, I think there's maybe a lot more interest in like the technological artifact and really thinking about the algorithm and sort of the effect of the new technology, in the case of my talk at least, relative to, maybe the impact on like demand or consumer preferences or something. So you'll notice that just the points of emphasis and the things that people are interested in, and the ways that they phrase the questions might be different. I don't know that there is like a silver bullet solution to kind of solving this problem, because it's going to depend a lot on your particular research and what you do. But I really do think that for me, like after I gave a few talks in the marketing departments and gave a few talks in IS departments, like I really did get a strong sense for what the like common questions were, and how these different audiences thought about things. And so if you're able to, I would really recommend just trying to give talks to people that are from these fields, whether it's, people from grad school, or if, I don't know if you're still at USC or if you're elsewhere, but, like for me, I was able to give a talk, like a marketing seminar at MIT, even though I'm not in the marketing group. So just doing like things and giving yourself exposure to these different audiences to like understand how they'll take the talk, I guess.
Did you prepare like a different set of slides for them, or is it more like you just emphasize different things in your slides?
I did not have different slides. I started towards the end, like once or twice I got some feedback that would be like, well, if you're talking about this in a marketing talk, you really need to cite like X or Y paper, which is like a big paper in marketing or something. And so towards the end, I started making small iterations like that. And so maybe I would have, like one version for marketing and one version for IS that had little changes like that. But I was not making, totally different slide decks or anything like that.
I'll just say quickly, I mean, yeah, it's, I was hoping Dave would define information systems for me to make this easier. But I think really when you're thinking about marketing and IS, like marketing has kind of the quant side and the behavioral side. So if you're going to err on gearing your talk towards a particular audience, you want to try and relate it to like human behavior in some way, and get the behavioral half of the audience interested. Whereas I think a lot of IS people kind of come from computer science or engineering. And so if you can try and, describe your project that would, in a way that would connect with them, I think that can be, I mean, every department is different. Like IS is such a diverse field, it's really hard to give generic advice, but at the very highest margin, I think that's kind of the direction I would veer.
Thank you both.
All right, thank you. Just a heads up, one of the MIT professors is here. That's fine. Our next speaker, Summer.
Thanks, Alex and Dave, for doing this. Both of you talked about your job market paper, but I was curious to know what was the role played by your working papers and your research portfolio in general. Did that play any role in this process?
I can say for a fact that for me, as an IS person trying to get into a marketing department, it was really important that I think my other papers outside of my job market paper are also very related to marketing. So I think that just came across as a very strong signal that like this guy's not just, he didn't just apply because he was desperate this year, but he's actually been thinking about these topics, which we find interesting. So I will say it's useful to have a portfolio. Like they don't all have to be the most advanced papers, but like especially if you're trying to make a different market, like trying to signal that you don't just have one project can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the talk itself, so in my job talk, I had a slide at the end that sort of had these backup slides where I said, I have all these other papers. If anyone wants to talk about them in the 5-10 minutes left that we have, happy to do so. I think I never once went into any of those slides at all, so maybe useful to have. But I think in terms of the talk itself, did not go into those those slides on these other projects. I did get the sense that these hiring committees were taking my full body of work into consideration, and so as Alex said, especially if you're trying to switch fields or something like that, it can help if you have like a body of work that shows that you're kind of you're adaptable in that way, and it's not just this one paper. And I definitely found when I was doing these flyouts, in addition to the talk, you do have all these one-on-one meetings with most of the professors in the department, and often a lot of that meeting is talking about research, be it your research or their research. And it was not uncommon in those one-on-one meetings for a given faculty member to say, oh, I noticed that in addition to your job market paper, you have this other paper on X, Y, or Z. That's really interesting. I have some related work. Could we talk more about that? And so, people are paying attention to that stuff. They're, certain things pique their interest. And so it does shape, I think, the holistic impression that the schools have of you.
So I've also come to realize that you get invite because of your profile, but you get a job because of your job market talk. I hope that was the summary of what Alex and Dave said.
That's 100% my. I 100% agree. I think, essentially the way you should think about it is your CV and your application will get you a flyout, but like after that point, it's really the flyout itself and their evaluations of your one-on-ones and your job market paper, which are going to have just such a much larger influence than the whether you put that like third extracurricular on your CV or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly the way that I would describe it, and how others have described it to me. Is everything else sort of gets you in the door for the flyout, and then it's up to you to give a good talk and have good meetings and convince people that they should hire you.
So Samir, sorry, I don't think the answer was precise enough that that can help you.
No, this was useful. Thanks.
All right. Inviting Tara now to ask the question.
Hi, thanks so much, Dave and Alex. I was wondering if you had any specific advice for someone like me coming from a computer science rather than a traditional B school background, and looking at these same sort of computational social science questions, but from that background. Thank you so much.
I'll just say, I mean, I don't have a CS background myself, but I will say that if you're trying to get into IS specifically, like there's I think historically it's been based around economics. So really kind of beefing up your econ knowledge and being able to speak to economists and think about problems the way that they do, it's very different than like traditional computer science paradigms. And I think the econ flavor of research is kind of just more amenable to publication at top IS journals for whatever reason. And so I think, there's definitely some pure CS type of people in IS, and you can find your community with them if you want to stick with that type of research. But I think if you were to focus on one thing, it would be economics or marketing type of questions.
Yeah, this is a good question, albeit one that I don't know that I'm very qualified to answer, because I'm not sure how IS or even marketing hiring committees think about this. And I would, if you do ever ask someone who's been on the other side of the table, I'd be really curious to hear what they have to say. I mean, I know, as Alex said, in IS, there are some sort of sort of like quote unquote pure computer scientists, I guess. And I get the sense in marketing too, right, that there's more and more sort of machine learning and things like this. And so people would be interested in hiring someone coming from more of a computer science, computational social science background. I would guess, this is just kind of speculation, that you want to show that you are sort of adaptable and can fit in these departments. And I don't think that means that you want to completely change who you are as a person. But so there's the NBER runs this really great economics of digitization workshop every 6 months, and in the winter there's a graduate student tutorial beforehand. And I bring it up just because one of the parts of this tutorial is Avi Goldfarb, who runs it along with Shane Greenstein, sort of says, imagine that you're an economist and you're thinking about going into a business school interview. What should you do? And I think the upshot of a lot of his advice is kind of, do a little bit of homework. Like if you're interviewing for a marketing job, like read the basic marketing textbook, read a few marketing papers, maybe go to some of the marketing conferences and get a feel. And so I think similarly, if you have work that fits and you've kind of like gone to some of the conferences, have read the papers, have read the textbooks, maybe you've submitted one paper to like a journal in one of these fields, and can just kind of like speak the language, then I think that these departments would find it very valuable, because there are tons of people in IS and marketing departments, and I'm sure other departments too, that like want to work with computer scientists. And so if you're a computer scientist that shows to them that you can kind of bridge the boundary and write papers with them and are interested in publishing those papers in the journals that they care about and things like that, I'd imagine that probably helps a lot. But again, this is all kind of just speculation on my part.
Just to add to this, I think there are some business schools which are known to hire computer scientists very regularly, not just for IS, but some of the other departments as well. And these are not the universities that are like necessarily the ones which are tech heavy, but some of the business schools have this flavor. So I think it may help for you to take a look at why they hired them and what are the kind of research that they are doing for you to get some idea. I think that is something that you can do as well, along with what Alex and Dave mentioned.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, cool. Before inviting Prasanna, for the audiences who wanted to ask a question or interact with Alex and Dave, please raise your hand. We'll be inviting at most 2 audiences. If there isn't any, we will then invite our speakers to make some conclusion remarks, and then let's call it a day. Okay, Prasanna, please.
Hey, thank you so much, Alex and Dave, for doing this, and Chenshuo and Raveesh for organizing this. Before I ask my question, just a quick note about the previous question that was asked. Stern 2 years ago hired two assistant professors, and they're both pure computer science. You may find it helpful to maybe reach out to them. They're Zhao Sidok and Junpei Komiyama. So they're both assistant professors at Stern. So my question, I guess, some of it has already been sort of answered, but it's related to, trying out the job market in a field that's outside of IS. I guess it's more related to Dave, your experience interviewing at Berkeley, because I think the management and organizations department is maybe like less adjacent to IS than maybe marketing is. So, just your job talk experience, was it, I don't know, like different or like more difficult in a certain way? Because, I'm sure you had to like do your literature review differently, so on and so forth. And the second question I had was, like, did you have to do any convincing, when you're doing these flyouts, like, convincing these people that, okay, like this is a department, even though it's outside of my home, department, it's where I would, fit in. Like, did you have to do any convincing on your part?
This is a good question. So I do think, so for my job talk at Berkeley, which I guess is the job that I ended up taking, to your point, more so than the marketing talks, I think I spent a little bit of time before the talk thinking about, how might I fit in here and things like that. And so, I did add in 1 or 2 slides that were kind of, how might my research connect to some of the research that other people in this department are doing. But I didn't go over the top with it. I added in 1 or 2 slides. I maybe added, 1 or 2 citations to other papers. But I didn't try to radically transform who I was. For that department, I have a co-author who actually is a professor now, but had completed her PhD in that department. And so it was helpful to kind of chat with her about it and pick her brain and get a sense for, the interests of people in the department and things like that. But I think the important thing to keep in mind too is, like, for me, I was equally thinking, okay, this is maybe not as immediately related to what I do. And so what are the benefits of joining a department like this for me? And so it was useful to go through this exercise, not only to think about how do I sort of like impress these people or convince them to give me a job, but also to, sort of think through what would be the benefits to me of joining this department. And I ultimately was able to figure out some pretty, sort of compelling answers that eventually led me to accept the job. I guess like one way to think about it is ultimately this group of people chose to give you a flyout or a first round interview for a reason. It's not like random. Something in your profile interested them. And so you don't need to be someone other than yourself. Like your research and the way you think about things is, why they chose to interview you. And I think in my case, they saw that I might bring something to the department that was something they didn't already have. And so even though I work on different things and maybe think about things in a slightly different way, that was appealing for the department and was not, like a deterrent. And I guess the last thing I would say is like, I guess maybe the one thing you want to signal, if anything, is just that you are willing to be open-minded and work with people that have maybe a different research perspective or a different research background than you do. And I guess this relates to Tara's question as well, and that there are many essentially sociologists in my new department at Berkeley, and so I think sort of signaling both through some of my current projects and in my conversations with people that I'm curious about that and want to learn more, and I'm willing to do some work that lies at the intersection of those two worlds. That I think was probably helpful and probably made people feel excited about hiring me. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting and tough question.
I can just echo everything Dave said and say, at least for me, on my cover letter, like I did explicitly address, I said, look, I though my degree is in IS, like I'm genuinely interested in this marketing department for this reason. And I mean, I could genuinely say, I've been thinking about quant marketing problems for a long time. I've taken all the quant marketing seminars in our marketing department. I know these marketing professors. So like it wasn't like, if that wasn't genuine, like I wouldn't recommend doing anything like that, because you should only signal to the extent that you can be earnest about what you're trying to signal. So that's it's not something that I think you should try to over engineer. And yeah, I mean, as we mentioned, like once you get the flyout, like I think it's super important just to again be as earnest with yourself as possible and with the other people, because you don't need to try and misrepresent yourself or change who you are, because in all likelihood, like you've developed some persona over the course of your PhD, and I think you want to, if it's a good fit, you'll want that persona to be able to kind of flourish, even if it's in a different environment than your PhD was. So, yeah, I would say don't overdo it, but you at least want to. And this question did come up a few times in my one-on-one interviews, and I would address it there, like why are you interested in marketing? And again, I could just speak to my genuine interest and background. But I think that would have been much more difficult if I didn't have that interest for the past few years.
Like a lot of academics, they can be forgetful, but they will remember you for long if they've had coffee or lunch with you during the job talk. So what Dave and Alex are recommending is to put extra effort to be yourself and don't strategize. Like, okay, so I'll also now invite X-Ray.
Super helpful, thank you.
So X-ray, we cannot identify you based on the bio information, but I saw that you were followed by so many PhD folks. So I hope that you're asking a relevant question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for letting me in. And I actually want to add one point to Tara before I ask the question. So I think, so for the departments, IS departments that have a strong tradition or needs for design science research, I think they would be more willing or more open to hire computer scientists in their department. And that's just one of my observations. And my question is that I wonder whether your job talk papers are entirely individual work or some sort of collaborative work with others. And if it's the latter one, how is it usually received by the hiring committee compared with individual works? And any tips for presenting collaborative work as your job talk papers? Thank you.
X-Ray, maybe some background story about yourself could be helpful here.
Yeah, so I'm a doctoral student from an IS department. And yeah, thank you.
Sure, I can take a stab at this. So my job market paper had co-authors. So my advisor, Sinan, is a co-author. It was also a project that I did in collaboration with people at Spotify. And so I have a number of industry co-authors from Spotify. I get the sense that at least in IS, it's pretty common for people to go on the market with papers that are co-authored by their advisors. If I'm just trying to think about people who I know well in my department who have sort of graduated before me, I think many people had job market papers that were co-authored with advisors. And so I don't think that that's necessarily any kind of negative signal. I do think that this can introduce some challenges if you are trying to do this sort of movement from field to field, like we mentioned, because I think it's pretty common in IS and I guess maybe marketing too to have a co-author advisor. But for instance, my impression is that in strategy, it's way less common, and the expectations are that your job market paper will be solo authored. And so, in that particular market, I think it can be a little bit of a red flag if if you were trying to move into that market with a paper that had co-authors on it. I guess the thing is, and this is a little bit speculative on my part, but I think the letter that especially if your co-authors on this paper are your advisor or other people on your committee, there'll be information in the letter that kind of gives a sense of, how much or how little of the work that you were doing on this jointly authored paper. And so I think as long as, it's a paper where you're really the driving force and are the person that is kind of pushing that work forward, I think people will get that information and will have the context and won't pay too much attention to the fact that there are co-authors on it, at least in, sort of the fields that I'm familiar with. Yeah, I'll stop.
Yeah, so just to echo what Dave says here. So I wouldn't personally try and over-engineer your job market paper. Your job market paper, I think, should be your best piece of research up to that point that you're, most proud of and able to present well. And yeah, I think the point is that what matters to a hiring committee is that they can, when you're giving a job talk, that you convince them that you're somebody who has your own agenda of research and is going to be conducting research independently of their co-authors and advisors. And I think that's something that you can't get from the number of co-authors on the paper. And it will more or less become apparent through, as Dave said, whether it's your letters, your job talk, your one-on-one interviews. I think, if I were to offer some advice of thinking about your projects, it's just important to have at least, one project where you are the driver, because I think it's very obvious in situations where you were kind of added as a co-author, or the idea wasn't your idea. I think it's useful to be able to, credibly signal that you can start a project and get it to an advanced point.
I see. Thank you. So basically, I need to demonstrate that I'm taking the lead of this project and then I'm contributing the most part. Is that
right? Yeah.
Okay.
It shouldn't be something like, well, my advisor had this project and then added me as a co-author, and then that's my job market paper. It should be something that you're genuinely passionate about and that comes through, and you can speak about your entire process from inception to the point that you present it. That's just kind of that's the process that you'll be taking as a or you'll be expected to take as an assistant professor. And so I think it's important to kind of signal that.
I see, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Before we call it a day, I'm inviting Alex and Dave to make some final remarks for the job market for the PhD candidate that are on the job market this year. What is the single most important thing among other important things that you think a job market candidate should focus on? Should, pay every ounce of their energy to engineer? That's
I'll go ahead and conclude first, if that's okay. So I'm going to cheat and say more than one thing, but let me just say the first thing is I've recently come across a couple very interesting threads on Twitter from people who seem to have just as good of advice that I can give you here. So if you go to my Twitter page, I just have a couple of tweets that I found useful about generic job market advice that may have echo or say something in a different way than what we've said here. So there's two things that I think I want to kind of emphasize and make the big takeaway, at least from my portion of this session, which is the first thing is to define success in your own way, and don't let the system, don't let academia, don't let your advisor define what success means for you. And this, I think this is a process that starts with your mindset very early on in your degree in terms of knowing what you want out of your program, knowing where you want to end up. And so for me, the success at the end of my degree was like getting a job and working somewhere, at a place that I could expect to enjoy in a city that I wanted to live in. And, everything else on top of that is kind of the cherry on top, but it's just important to know what your definition of a success is and to pursue that independently and realize that nobody else is looking out for your personal interests. For example, I have a very strong preference to live on the West Coast. And that's not something that, if I were just trying to maximize the rank of the school that I was trying to get a job at, that's not something you would do. You wouldn't constrain yourself geographically. But that was just important to me. And so I didn't let other people kind of define what mattered to me in terms of where I wanted to be. And the last thing I'll say, which I think can be sometimes underappreciated in academia, is my main piece of advice is just to be firstly genuine, but also to be a nice person. One of the primary things that people are looking at when you're going through the job market process, when you're giving your job talk, when you're going through the one-on-ones, they're not just evaluating your research and your CV. Obviously that is super important, that matters. But by the time you're at the end of the job market process or in the middle of the job market process, people are they're looking to hire you as colleagues, co-authors. And it's just, I think it's important to signal, this is not like an unbiased opinion. I think there should be more nice people. It should be nicer in academia. And I think it's just important to make sure you come across as somebody that, people want to hang out with for the next 20 years potentially, right? It sounds like a crazy, overwhelming decision that people are making, and it is. And I think it goes underappreciated how important it is to just be a good colleague and to be a good person. So I think I'll conclude with that.
Yeah, I agree 100% with both of the things that Alex said, and maybe just to add my 2 cents, although I think my 2 cents are going to sound very similar to what he said. Everyone has their own objective function, and I think that your objective function might be quite different than your colleagues, your cohort mates in your PhD program, your advisor. And so I think it's important to just that objective function is for you and to maximize it. And maybe for you it is being in the best ranked school or whatever, but I think for many people it's not, because you don't want to undercount other things that matter to you, the place that you live, your proximity to friends, maybe your proximity to nature, being in a city, being in a smaller town, whatever. All these things might matter to someone, and they're totally valid things, I think, to care about, because you might be in the place that you choose for, you know, like up to 20 years or something, as Alex was saying. And so, yeah, and I think it's good to have that kind of conversation with yourself at the beginning of the process, because I think once you're in it and you're talking to people and you're getting offers and things like that, you can find yourself really kind of like talking yourself into things, because these departments and these people do a great job of, you know, convincing you how amazing it would be to be in their department, and you can kind of lose sight of what you care about. And so it's you know, it's good to like just have this conversation with yourself, both to make the decision that's going to be right for you, and to not get, you know, really stressed out and caught up in the game of it all. And yeah, I mean, people are, you know, choosing who they want to be colleagues with for, you know, potentially decades. And similarly, you are choosing who your colleagues will be for a long time. So, you know, be a good person, be nice as you should be. And also, you know, think about, you know, the sort of just the atmosphere and how you get along with people, and whether you can see a particular apartment as somewhere that you, you know, you sort of fit in. Yeah, I mean, I don't have, I'm trying to think if I have any other things that I would really emphasize. You know, I do think there's this sort of, you know, at least this year, and I don't know if this is a normal thing, you know, I think exploding job offers definitely seem to be a reality, where, you know, some departments will say, hey, here's an offer, and you have, you know, a week or 2 weeks or 3 days to decide. And I think it's worthwhile to push back on that a little bit if you can. So maybe that's one like last piece of advice that I would give. I think often, you know, the other side of the market totally understands the position that you're in, and they're sympathetic to your situation. And especially if you say, you know, I'm really waiting to hear back from this one particular school, and I think I'll be able to hear back with a few days. And, you know, I'll also tell them that I have this deadline. Most places are willing to work with you, and you don't want to be like pressured into a decision that you might, you know, subsequently not feel as excited about as you would hope. And I think all departments want you to end up there and be really excited. They don't want to feel like they've, you know, sort of like hoodwinked you into accepting a job that you don't want. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to try to work with them and figure something out. And yeah, I mean, ultimately it's like a stressful and crazy process, but you, as I said earlier, you know, it's a really cool process as well. You get to meet a lot of people. You get to have tons of interesting conversations about research. In a normal year, I guess you would get to visit a lot of places and sort of think about your potential life living in all these different cities or towns, or maybe even countries. And so, you know, I think as much as you can, just trying to go into it with a positive mindset and sort of, you know, have fun and think about the positive elements, I think can probably help a lot.
These are great words as concluding remarks. Thank you so much. And this is exactly why I know I'm such good friends with you, Alex. And I also know that we're going to be good buddies once and whenever we meet. Dave, thank you so much again. And to everyone else, I also hope to meet you soon in conferences whenever that opens up. And super thanks to Chenshuo for organizing everything. Over to you, Chenshuo.
Sure, sure. It's been 1.5 hours for this room, and I guess my last question is, would you be hiring next year? This is a joke, and
I'm sure I have zero influence, but feel free to reach out if you guys are interested where I'm at. I just want to say thank you, huge thanks to Chenshuo and Raveesh for organizing this. As Raveesh said, I think there's a lot more behind the scenes for making a good seminar, and I think I hope we've had a good seminar here. So I appreciate you guys making this happen.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, thank you so much to Chenshuo and Raveesh for organizing this. It's been a lot of fun, you know, answering these questions and kind of reflecting on the process. And you know, I'm definitely happy to, you know, talk with anyone offline, I guess, about the job market further. And if people have specific questions or things that they didn't feel comfortable asking about in this sort of semi-public forum, shoot me an email, DM me on Twitter, but definitely feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. But like Alex, I do not know about future hiring plans, and I'm sure I will have little influence, even if I did know. So that's probably the one thing I can't help you with. But otherwise, happy to share, about my experiences and try to give any insight that I can.
Sure. Thank you all so much. We're going to end this room in about 30 seconds. If you're interested in our future talks, please follow the speakers on the panel. And yeah, I'm going to end this room. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.